justice, no peace. We say no justice, no peace. Racism holds us down so we can't breathe. No justice, no peace. Black lives matter the same as white. We say no justice, no peace. Won't turn back till we make it right. We say no justice, no peace. Racism holds us down so we can't breathe. No justice, no peace. Been down so long, now we've gotta be free. We say no justice, no peace. Don't kneel on my neck, 'cause I can't breathe. We say no justice, no peace. Racism holds us down so we can't breathe. No justice, no peace. Too many dying from COVID-19. We say no justice, no peace. Frontline workers with no PPE. We say no justice, no peace. Racism holds us down so we can't breathe. No justice, no peace. We say no justice, no peace. We say no justice, no peace. Racism holds us down so we can't breathe. No justice, no peace. Our mothers and grandmothers fought for us all. We say no justice, no peace. We'll change this world and the statues will fall. We say no justice, no peace. Racism holds us down so we can't breathe. No justice, no peace. The future belongs to the young today. We say no justice, no peace. They came through us, but they'll find their way. We say no justice, no peace. Racism holds us down so we can't breathe. No justice, no peace. Racism holds us down so we can't breathe.
No justice, no peace.
Smoke from California drifts to meet us. Greenland's melted glaciers lap the bay. Every choice we make creates a ripple. Yesterday's mistakes flow back today. How do we deal with this cruel pandemic? There's pandemonium and failure systemic. Lockdown, loss and loneliness. Are we forever changed? How can we come together now in this danger? A touch of carelessness, a cough of a stranger. Grandchild's touch, the hand of a friend could mean our life might end. Smoke from California drifts to meet us. Greenland's melted glaciers lap the bay. Every choice we make creates a ripple. Yesterday's mistakes float back today. How can we raise our voice when song is forbidden? But still we reach across our lonely divisions. Can't stop us creating out of chaos new ways to resist. When lockdown stopped the clocks, we all heard birdsong. When cities emptied out, the blue skies were day long. If we can remember this, we'll live with earth in peace. Smoke from California drifts to meet us. Greenland's melted glaciers lap the hay. Every choice we make creates a ripple. Step into the sea of change today. Dolphins reappearing in our harbor. City streets of green become an arbor. Waters clear, this brief reprieve for humans, bringing nature back into our lives.
We'll stand up to those bullies of the town. Whether they're called fascists or simply play the clown, we'll stand up to those bullies and we'll bring them down. As we change this world around and round and round, bullies always can be found. As we change this world around, we'll stand up to those bullies and we'll bring them down. Boris and Putin, Trump and Erdogan, Bolsonaro and his mates, the list goes on and on. But Trump was dumped by voters, now he's gone. As we change this world around and round and round, bullies always can be found. As we change this world around, we'll stand up to those bullies and we'll bring them down. Old boys from Eton long for the good old days when the empire's map was coloured red, Britannia ruled the waves, and all the lower orders knew their place. As we change this world around and round and round, bullies always can be found. As we change this world around, we'll stand up to those bullies and we'll bring them down. Boris uses Priti Patel as his bully of the class, propped up by the cruelty and power of the past. But statues fall, their power will not last. As we change this world around and round and round, bullies always can be found. As we change this world around, COVID's over, I'll take my tracksuit off and cut my hair. When COVID's over, I'll get some new shoes to wear. But when COVID's over, I want a world that's better than before, where there's no homeless sheltering in the door. Lockdown seemed endless, made me cancel my holiday in Spain. And when those airport gates open up once again, ooh, some vaccinated few can fly away to their sunny villa rent. But when COVID's over, I'll be in a tent. Staying in a bubble doesn't keep us out of trouble. We're all in this together now. We need to share the vaccine. Hoarding it is obscene and wouldn't save us anyhow. I ate out to help out. Now food banks will be the cruel takeaway. Don't want new normal to end up in this way. No missing your touches. I had to leave your birthday present at the door, 'cause you were too scared to come out anymore. COVID knows no borders, smashed the global order, took my breath away. Like a pane of glass that's broken with each life that has been taken, we'll see our world reflected in a different way.
Hello, I'm Rob McDonald, and I am going to today interview two cousins, two nieces of the Brigadier Sidney Shostek, Elaine and Wendy. Hi, guys. Are you there?
Hello there, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Hi, Wendy. Hi, Luke. Okay, then. So first of all, before we get onto Sidney and his story as the International Brigadier on the Ciudad de Barcelona, why don't you, in turn, just say a little bit about who you are? Maybe we start with Wendy. You give the listeners a little bit of an idea of who you are.
Well, I, like my uncle, have traveled around the world and made my way home in Wales, in Caerphilly. As a hospital artist, the job I got was as a hospital artist, and that sort of connected with my connection with Spain in a sense, because when I met Ray, my husband, he discovered to his delight that he was also related to a brigadista, and we put together a monument in Cardiff to the memory of those who defended Spain and the Spanish democracy, and it was a great privilege to meet so many brigadistas who were still alive in the 80s and 90s. That was absolutely brilliant. I feel like our lives have all been interwoven, and it's been a really important part of my sort of political education, and so to meet those people.
Okay, cool. So, Elaine, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So, yeah, we're sisters. Wendy was born in Britain, and we separated when she was 11. She went off into the West Indies, and I stayed in the States. So that's why I haven't American accent and she has a British accent. And I worked in water pollution control until I retired. But I would come over here being Cardiff, to be with Wendy because it's so vital here. People have a sense of their own past and living history, and they remember things from the 1700s, and we just have this wiping out of history in the States, especially in my family because of the danger of the 50s and the things that happened to us. So I was always proud of my Uncle Sidney. It was always this kind of very exciting and slightly maybe illegal person in my childhood that was always present and in my family, even though we couldn't talk about him.
Interesting. So you're talking about like the 50s MacArthur era and all that kind of stuff, and you know, and as a young girl seeing that in your family, but having this sort of this dark history, if you like. It's not dark, obviously, in our opinion. But interesting.
Right.
Interesting.
Should I tell you a little about that?
Yeah. Tell. I mean, it's interesting.
So I would have been 5, 6, 7 years old, and I would ask my mom questions about where her family came from. And that would have been Latvia, I suppose, and pogroms, or about my Uncle Sidney, who was mentioned, but mostly not. And she'd say, we don't want to talk about that. And it's because there was an anti-communist purge in my father's workplace. And because my Uncle Sidney was a communist, my father's job was endangered. And I really have a feeling that the FBI came to the door. I'm not sure it actually happened, but I do know that there was lots of inquiries about it, and everybody just clamped down on the information and never talked about it. So that when Wendy said later that Sidney's memories and possessions and things had been found, essentially in a trash can and saved, it was really exciting for me to resurrect. Because even though there was silence, my family was still progressive. As much as, reading The Nation magazine, supporting civil rights, but not able to and talking about it at the table, arguing, but not able to publicly support it.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get onto Sidney a little bit in a bit, and he obviously was a communist and an activist and a trade unionist. But your father wasn't. You're saying, but they were political in general, but they didn't.
American liberal, I suppose, but
Which
always
is not the same as British liberal.
No. But like, for instance, Mom would always stand up against racism, at whatever level. She might not have said that she was Jewish, but if she heard something racist, she would immediately call people out. And I thought, I think that was a really valuable. That was obviously, really strong lesson to learn.
Yeah, and the music that we were raised on was Pete Seeger and the Wobblies.
So it was politics, but it was kept because of the era that the 50s were in the US. You had to be quiet, otherwise you'd lose your job, or you'd be chased down, or there'd be a knock on the door. This kind of repression.
Well, Sidney's best friend, in a sense, was his cousin, who is my mother's cousin. Is that right? Yes, my mother's cousin as well, obviously, who was a communist and had to change his job every year. And his wife had so many stories about the FBI, following the car, tapping the phone, thinking that the order for Polish sausage was actually a code for something, when in fact it was an order for Polish sausage.
Tell about our cousin Sidney and her experience in Mexico.
So that cousin's daughter then was named Sidney after Sidney, and the family had to. So this is complicated. The second wife became the partner of this guy who was into gadgets. Tried to sell this surveillance gadget to the States, was refused, and then took it to the Russians. And so they had to flee to Mexico, taking Sidney with them. And in the dead of night, there was a raid, and her parents were taken off, leaving this 10-year-old with her 3-year-old brother alone in the house by the FBI. So that must have been when was that, in the 60s?
Right. So there's, I mean, we're talking here, which is actually a very, I mean, it's a very interesting subject. We're going to get onto the history in Sydney and his past, but actually, this is the aftermath,
Yeah,
that faced a
yeah.
lot of the international brigadistas when they came back to the States, and other countries, but particularly in the US. And it's also something that's not really known. We celebrate them now as these working class heroes, but actually, not only do they struggle in a war, but actually when they got back, their lives were crushed in many ways. So let's talk about Sidney a little bit, shall we? I mean, what can you tell me about his life before coming to Spain?
Well, he was the middle child. My mother's was the youngest child of three, and his parents had fled the pogroms in Russia. So they must have had some stories, but he never knew his grandfather because he was murdered by in the pogroms. So they made a new life in Newark, New Jersey, and then New York. But they also had connections with Argentina. But anyway, Sidney's father was a house painter.
Okay.
And so I believe he would have taken Sidney with him on some of these jobs. I know he took his other son with him. And they were on the May Day parade in New York. And I gather that Sidney was fairly argumentative and would get into political debates with some of the people whose houses they were painting. But he was a very good athlete and hiker, and he was in the hiking club that his brother and my mother were in. A photographer. He took his own, photographs, developed them. And I think he was the youngest Teamsters union leader at 23. And he hired a plane during the laundry workers' strike in Washington to drop leaflets on the city from this airplane. So he had been really active before he got to Spain.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I come from a construction background myself, so I know about painter and decorators, and I know about arguments on building sites. So he was he was a painter and decorator, or an outside house painter. What kind is it, or is it just generally known?
Not sure.
I
Not
thought he
sure.
was a paper hanger.
Okay.
This is Grandpa, Sidney's father.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, and so he was a president of the Teamsters Union at 23.
Secretary of the Teamsters chapter in Washington. Yeah.
Okay, that's something. So he knew about struggle, and he knew about working class struggle and these kind of things. I mean, I guess these are the reasons he came to Spain. Do you know much more about his reasoning, his logic about why he wanted to come to the Spanish Civil War?
Well, I mean, there's 3 pages of his diary left, and there's a few letters that he sent to my mother's cousin, in which he's very clear that if that fight was not won in Spain, they would be next. It would turn into this global conflict, and of course he was right. That's what happened.
Do you know what politicized him personally? Because there's lots of people that come from political families who just take a passing interest and have a political view, but they don't become secretaries of important unions, and they don't get on ships and fight in civil wars. Do you have any idea what his spark was for being such a radical?
I think he was a great reader, wasn't he? In spite of the fact that his father would have had an absolutely minimal primary education. He graduated from high school, but he in the photograph of him, he's got a gun in one hand and a book in the other.
Okay, that's quite symbolic, isn't it? Let's be honest.
I think so. I don't know the answer to that though, because we never, of course, nobody talked about him.
Do you know much about how he actually signed up, how he actually got himself over there, and the story of his travel? Is there anything much known about that?
There's a newspaper article in the Washington paper at the time of his death, and it described how his mother was distraught, but that he told her that he was going to Paris, and gave her this story on holiday. And when he asked my mother what did she want him to bring back? And she said, nothing, just bring yourself back. So it was almost as if she had some premonition.
Yeah, maybe she knew, eh?
She may possibly.
I mean, a lot of the brigadistas did the different stories that I've read, and particularly the ones of the Ciudad de Barcelona brigadistas. They often met in Paris and then travelled in different pairs and groupings, and then they met up in Marseille. But I think also some of them, in other stories I've read, at least, they were planning to not go by ship, but the border had actually been shut. And therefore they found themselves on the Ciudad de Barcelona. I mean, that's as I understand it. Is there any more to the story that you know?
Wendy, talk about going over the mountain.
Oh, that was, we were following the route of some of the other brigadistas from, but Sidney wouldn't have, no, because he would have landed in Malgrat. Well, he would have, you know, he'd intended to go to elsewhere, but so he wouldn't have gone over the Pyrenees. But there is a photograph of him on the boat, but I believe the photograph we have on the boat is of him crossing from New York.
Okay.
Not of you know, not in Marseille. So
and did they travel together from New York, or was that more an individual sort of journey?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. If there were any people who knew him, I don't think he went with anyone, because because he thought he was one of only a handful of survivors. He was a very good swimmer, so he helped save this Sankari, the Finnish journalist, who was sort of overweight and he couldn't swim. So Sidney helped.
This was on the Ciudad de Barcelona. Yeah. This is okay. Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about that story then. So what do you know about his experiences in the Ciudad de Barcelona? Do you know?
Well, he's quite casual about it. It's sort of like, you know, his diary reads quite starkly, doesn't it, Elaine? Yeah, I heard that story from a Canadian, I think, who's a researcher, who linked up his story with he was described as a slight American who rescued this journalist from Finland. But yeah, I could.
I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, as horrific as the story is, you know, they are traveling. They haven't even arrived yet to the Civil War. They, you know, I read different stories that, you know, some of them were very relaxed, and, you know, some were on the deck and this kind of thing, although they weren't meant to. And, you know, and then bang, within a short space of time, they're in the middle of the Spanish Civil War, you know, and then, you know, and then you're lucky enough to be a good swimmer if you're not, you know, although there was some good swimmers who were lost. And I guess it depended on the situation that you were in when the ship was actually hit by the torpedo. Yeah.
I've got it, the transcription here, and it says all it says is Ciudad de Barcelona torpedoed and sunk by Italian submarines. I swam ashore. President Luis Companys of Catalonia spoke to the survivors, and then he slept in the Carlos Marx barracks. So that's it's not really a personal diary, is it? That's
no, it's a very simple. This is just what happened. I mean, some of the I mean, I interviewed the Freeman family as well, like I'm with you, and one of the things that was in that account was that they couldn't say straight away. They couldn't write the letters about what happened. There was a little bit of sort of clandestine. So a lot of the information we find, you know, is sort of later on, you know, or held back for a little bit, you know. So it's I mean, as you know, part of the Solidarity Park project has been about unraveling all this history, and it's quite a difficult task, you know, because you got little snippets of here, but when you put them together, You know, you start
What
to
we found,
understand.
Elaine, isn't it, when we went to on the archaeological dig in Belchite,
Yeah.
that you think that the history is lost, you think that you'll never find it, that they've buried it, but these little clues
Yes.
enable people to put the story back together again.
Well,
And,
tell us about what, I mean, because the Ciudad de Barcelona story is something that's very central to what we're doing here today. But the other thing about this project is to build up this bigger picture, you know. So what happened to Sidney after the sinking? Do you know much about that? Do you know?
Well, the beginning is the Ciudad de Barcelona, and the end is the taking of Belchite in September of 37, when he was shot by a sniper. And so between those two, we've got 3 pages of diary, and Captain the Spanish the American commander, Bob Merriman, mentions Sidney quite a lot because he became his aide. The secretary, the battalion secretary, and was, I think, quite very valued. And he said that he wanted to make sure to keep him in a safe position. So when the city was taken, he put him to accompany the prisoners. But unfortunately, there was a sniper in the tower who shot him. So I think he was very valued, and his like you were saying, he was a working class intellectual, wasn't he, in a sense, and his views were he was very secure in his views and very valued in his opinions.
So he basically he survived the Ciudad de Barcelona, and he survived another 4 months. Really, are we talking there? And then
Yeah.
it was to September, more or less 4 or 5 months.
Yes.
Yeah. But we went back to Belchite a couple times, several times, and it was so shocking to me how the presence of the war was so there, because obviously it hadn't been changed, right? It was a policy as a warning or something. So we were there walking through just this dusty ruins, looking into houses, and it was so real, his death. And then later we went on a dig around the area.
Yeah. But,
You went on an archaeological dig of the. Okay, because I have also, when I've interviewed other people, they've talked about going to the sites of their family, and actually finding still like bullet bits and shrapnel and this kind of stuff. And this does fit with the general story, and one of the importance of this project, because there's a lot of, we're only now really it's being talked about properly, and still there's a right and left battle in the Spanish state. You know, it still exists. You know, getting rid of Franco out of the grave. There's still mass graves out there. There's still families of missing people. There's still stories untold. So it's very interesting that when you went on an archaeological thing. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Elaine,
Go ahead, Wynn.
You probably remember the details of finding. So we were doing in rows through this field, sort of looking for artifacts, and all of a sudden somebody reaches down and picks something up, and they said it's an unexploded grenade.
Shit.
So that went into the.
I think for me, the things that were really touching was actually I dug and found a button of somebody's uniform, but every little piece is a little dot that adds together, so they can tell maybe the guy. And in the evenings, the archaeologist would give talks to us, and I was really moved because he said he would go into a village, and the village would come out and say, "Oh, you're here. The grave is over there," and they had been saving it. Nobody was digging it. Nobody was growing crops on it. They were saving it for this moment. And then when he began digging, they'd say, "I want my uncle." And it was like, how can you find your uncle in a mass grave? It was really sad. He said, and we remember the woman who every day goes to the highway and throws out the bouquet where her father was murdered, and then the trucks run over it. But people don't forget.
No.
So that's an interesting point. I mean, do you have a grave for Sidney? Is he known where he is?
In the book American Commander in Spain, they say, and this is where Sidney fell, and this is but who knows where that is? You know, I
Mm.
think isn't it right that they bulldozed a lot the Belchite, and put all the the bodies into the pit
Mm.
outside the town, I believe.
I mean, that's quite
So
horrific in itself, isn't it?
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, I think there's it's interesting because while we're piecing this together, we're also talking about the whole legacy of post-Civil War and Franco's legacy, and even the
Right.
Ciudad de Barcelona itself was raided, you know, because it had brass handles on there, and divers went down, and it's like a desecration of people's graves, and if they even have them, and we don't know many of the people who are on board, even, you know, even the ones we do, their graves are kind of lost, you know. So it's shocking, really. But also it reflects, I mean, we talked a little bit about McCarthyism in the US, but also in that same period, a historical memory was tried to be wiped away, which obviously we're struggling to put back on the agenda, which yeah, it's difficult. So he doesn't have a grave. I mean, and
But the family made one. We went up to the
okay.
walls, we went outside, we said, we're going to decide this is the spot, and we sang, and singing for us is, in fact, a memorial. And so we
Yes.
sang a lot of songs, and we sang Danny Boy, you know, and for me, it was really putting him to rest in a way.
Yeah, that's lovely. I mean, that's really nice. I mean, this singing thing, let's just touch on that for a second. So, I mean, you talk, is there an artistic, I mean, Sidney was his dad was a painter. There's a,
yeah.
you
He
know,
was
I think you said you
yeah,
worked as an NHS artist at the beginning.
yeah,
There's singing.
yeah.
I've been
Yeah.
with you once when we met in Barcelona, and I couldn't stop you singing, which was lovely. So where does this come from? Is this a family thing? Is this comes with the politics, do you think?
Yeah, that's it was. I mean, singing is solidarity, isn't it? I mean, we've because Elaine and I, I'm in, I lead Cor Cochi on the Reds Choir in Cardiff, and Elaine sings with me, and we're singing, and this guy comes by, and tears are rolling down his face because we're singing his song, whether he's from Iraq or Palestine or Spain or Italy, or they recognize that connection through the song.
Yeah.
So our grandfather was very, very musical and played harp and flute, and that would be Sidney's father.
Accordion.
And accordion. And my mother and my father was a musician.
Never forgot his song.
Yeah.
She had hundreds of songs. Yeah.
So actually, we really do upset Wendy's children, because if anybody mentions anything, we start singing a song about it.
Lovely. But I mean, the podcast that I normally do is about arts and class struggle, you know, and I think the two things are, for me, being an artist and a creativity and doing the monument and the politics of the monument are just two parts of the same thing. They're not actually separate. They come from the driving force, just to be a human being and to, you know, and express. And so, yeah, it's interesting that the politics, and particularly with your family, has that. And I guess we don't know what Sidney's view on singing was, whether he was a purple or not. I mean, how old was he when he was killed?
23.
Yeah, so we're talking about a very young man.
Yeah,
you know. I mean, I think when I was 23, I think I thought I knew everything, but it's quite obvious now that I knew I didn't. But that's a very young age to pass. I mean, maybe one of the questions I'd like to get into is a little bit, what was the effect of his loss? Because I think it's often, we talk about the politics, we talk about the era, we don't always talk about how did it affect your mother, his little sister? You know, how did it affect his mother, Sidney's mother? You know, what do you know much about? I mean, you talked a little bit, Elaine, before about family not talking about it, but do we know anything about the emotional loss of losing Sidney?
I think it's, sadly enough, it's one of those things where there's this wound inside that doesn't get to be healed. And I think that's true for my mother, who's Sidney's sister, right?
I mean, in a way, it's hard for me to judge it, because the norm for us was not talking. We would sing at the drop of a hat, but we didn't talk. And I'm sure that is related to it in some way. You find that, Elaine?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it's almost like a family, it's a family reflection of actually what was going on in society. You know, it was going on with Franco covering up everything, or, you know, wiping it away. It was going on with McCarthyism trying to wipe it away. And that has a reflection in the lives of a family.
Right. It feels like it's uncaring, but I think it's trauma, which is different. Yeah. So Wendy, tell about finding Sidney's stuff in the garbage.
Okay, yeah, give us.
So Sidney's best friend was his cousin, who worked. He had lots of odd jobs, and one of them was working, I think, with as a rubbish collection or something. He got a call from his friend. He said, "I think I've got something I think you'd really be interested in." What had happened was they cast bronze plaques, which are about 3 foot by 2 foot at least, a very big portraits of a number of brigadistas, including Sidney, and they presented it to our grandparents, who lived by then in a caravan.
So sorry, just to recap so I get a full understanding of this. We're talking about a big brass plaque.
This is a huge.
Who made it? Who made it?
It was cast in. There probably is a name on it somewhere. It was given. So they couldn't keep, they didn't want, well, maybe, as you say, the trauma they couldn't keep it. They didn't keep it. They gave it it ended up in the dump, and the man who ran the dump was a friend of Casey, Sidney's cousin, who phoned him up, said, "I've got something here I think you want to have." He rescued it and then gave it to his daughter, Sidney, who now has it in San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
But
do you
it's
have a
enormous.
photograph of that?
Yeah.
Please send it, and maybe we'll put it in the notes for people to have a look at, because I think that's so that, I mean, here I am busy making a memorial, and it's interesting because there are ones out there already, you know, and almost lost in the rubbish, which is tragic in a way, but also fantastic that it was found.
Yeah. And so Wendy, his diary was found where?
It must have been picked up on the battlefield. I can't think anywhere else it would have been. It was a small, I think it was a small notebook, because there's only like 3 pages of it, which were then transcribed by one of the brigadiers on typed out, misspelled his name Shostek instead of Shostek, and that's what is in Adelphi University, are these 3 fragile typewritten sheets from the diary. So he was obviously taking notes all the time, as the brigade secretary. And so it must have just been like a little pocket notebook, I think.
Wow. And from that we build a history of somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, well, one of the final questions I really want to ask you is that, you know, all this history is fascinating, but it's what's the and it's fascinating because it's your family history, and it's fascinating because it's working class history. But I really want to ask you what you think the lessons are of all this. You know, what the lessons of the Spanish War. What is it we should be remembering? What's the important? Why is this important?
That was a really hard one. I mean, I could answer the other questions because they're kind of factual, if you like, but it's like delving into the unknown, I guess. But I talked to my son, who's become totally politicized by Brexit, by the situation in Wales at the moment, and he's seeing society as being atomized, fragmented, individualized. The capitalism does that, it takes away your collective action, and so he's trying to do collective actions to overcome that, in the same way that singing is a collective action that overcomes that isolation. And then so it's really, you know, trade unions, they're not what they were. Solidarity is not what it was. Solidarity action is not what it was. And yet we've had you know, this snowball effect of Extinction Rebellion. And when Ray, my husband, went to Palestine to work with the International Solidarity Movement, he met an Israeli who could speak very little English, but he said, Palestine no, sorry, he said Spain, 1937, Palestine today. He drew that connection, say, you know, coming out, seeing your struggle, that no one can be free until all are free, seeing your struggle as part of this global connection.
Yeah, I mean, I think this internationalism is key, really, to,
Yeah.
I mean, the International Brigade is, they are a reflection of that. But today, the struggles like of Black Lives Matter and things like that, how that shot across the world, how when there is a struggle, I mean, I remember what I think it was called the Arab Spring that led to the Indignado movement in Spain, which led to Occupy in the US. There is this era, I mean, and it was always there before this internationalism. When we think it's something new, I think because of the global interconnections, and here we are speaking over the internet, we think that internationalism is something new, but of course it wasn't, was it? It was born, you know, very much as part of the working class socialist struggle of the past. And I think
building each way, nothing coming out of nowhere, but building on what's been before.
What do you think, Elaine?
For a long time, I was quite angry that he died so young. I mean, he lands in Spain, he gets a little bit of training, he survives a few months and he's dead. And I thought, what a waste, he was just cannon fodder. But I think I've changed my mind since being there and knowing more about him. And now I just have a much more positive feeling that partly it was his youth. Having marched with young people and old people, I'd say the future belongs to the young in some way. And they're going to carry XR forward. They're going to carry Black Lives Matter forward in the same way Sidney did. And I think that I can get over the waste of his death because I can see something bigger now.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to finish it, actually, that the youth, it's the youth that, I mean, to lose somebody so young, yeah, it's terrible. Lots of other wars where it's not worth anything. But in this case, it's an example, you know. So, well, thank you very much for sharing your family history, talking about this important subject, being super supporters of the Solidarity Park project as well. And I look forward to us getting together and having a glass of wine or whatever it is. Hopefully post-COVID around a big monument to Sidney and his comrades.
And thank you for all the work you're doing.
Okay, great. Take good care. I'll see you all soon. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye then. Bye-bye.